Boy, do I have a treat for you guys today. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago, a very smart ear, nose, and throat doctor, a friend of mine, his name is Don Dennis, a wonderful man, came on the show, and he told me how he is helping people by understanding that fungus, when people inhale in moldy environments, fungus traps in the sinuses and in the lungs and so forth. And Dr. Dennis told me how many people he had helped. Well, then we get a phone call from Erin Porter, who saw Dr. Dennis when she was in her 20s. Erin, welcome to the show, and thank you so much. The book, she's written a book called Eat, Pray, Get Well. Eat, Pray, Get Well. And I'm telling you, I want this thing to fly off the shelves. Erin Porter is with me right now. So let's start there, and I know your problem started back before that, but let's start with your first visit with Dr. Dennis and what ensued, and how did he start to help you? What was going on?
I went to see Dr. Dennis probably 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I was so sick, and I had already been sick for a decade or more at that point.
Sick through your body or sick ear, nose, and throat?
All through my body.
Okay.
All through my body. It started at 19 with a simple sinus infection. After I moved into a moldy apartment, I started working Manhattan. But I didn't really think much of it. I was in that apartment for 9 months, and it just completely took me down. So about maybe 10 years after that, I found Dr. Dennis, and he did a surgery on me. He took out my tonsils and my adenoids, and I was getting ready to move to Florida. So he said, your sinuses are a mess. I don't want to do everything all at the same time, but when you get to Florida, take care of your sinuses. You need a surgery on your sinuses as well. So I think this was definitely God, because through those many years after that, I had 4 sinus surgeries, I had 2 tonsillectomies, and I had just been through the ringer because I had heart arrhythmias, and I won't tell you all the problems, but it was head to toe, restless leg, chronic fatigue.
That's what you say. Your book, Epstein-Barr, kept coming up. This is a virus that gets in the body. And doctors say, you know, treat it, maybe with Zovirax or some antiviral, but there's nothing you can do with this infection. You kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker.
Yes, I was put on antibiotics at 19, and I went to Manhattan's best ear, nose, and throat because it would clear up and it would come back. And so I stayed on antibiotics for the next 15, 20 years, and I mean every 3 months I would go back on. And I was happy to do so back then because I didn't know what I was doing to my body, so I kept taking them. And all I knew, it was the only relief that I got. Even if it was for a few months, I had some relief, and then it would get worse.
Hey, Erin, tell the folks about the 1999 study done at the Mayo Clinic, where they discovered that antibiotics aren't the drug of choice to use for chronic sinus problems.
Well, they found out that I think it's 94, 96% of cases they find fungus. And not just bacteria. And of course, bacteria are opportunistic, so where there's fungus, there's bacteria. There's usually both. So I kept getting treated for bacteria, and I became resistant to a lot of the antibiotics I was on. At one point, they wanted to put me on a PICC line, and 8 hours. And that was the point I knew enough, and I said, absolutely not. I still didn't know that I was dealing with fungus at that point yet. But I went to see a wonderful ear, nose, and throat, and he took a look at my CAT scan, and he said, you have one of the most severe fungal infections that I've ever seen.
He was in New York?
This was in Florida.
Okay, yeah.
So I thought, okay, I was disgusted, excited. Now I have something to work with. And around that same time, I found Know the Cause. And there was even an episode where you talked about sinus infections.
Wow.
I learned everything I could about fungus and started, instead of antibiotics, antifungals. And I had a couple different things happening. I had aspergillomas. Aspergillus is the fungus. And when I think back, the mycotoxins that were spewing inside my head, inside my sinuses for so many years, I had to keep getting those removed. They kept coming back. So it did take a good year or so with antifungals, changing my diet, using oil of oregano instead of, and things really started clearing up. But the cool thing was, it wasn't just my sinuses that started clearing up. My heart arrhythmias stopped, and I no longer had restless leg, and I had energy, didn't have chronic fatigue. So It was a journey. It was a long journey.
My show has aired, we're in our 21st year, which is unbelievable. I was a small piece of this puzzle. The doctor in Florida saying, oh my gosh, this is a horrible fungal condition, and you're going gross, right? Fungus in my... But folks, the Mayo Clinic she referenced said on 9/9/99, it was September 9th, 1999, I'll never forget that, my fax machine started going. All these doctors were saying, maybe you're right, Doug. The Mayo Clinic found that 96% of people who talk like this are treated with antibiotics for this, and for a short few weeks, they may get resolved. But the real bottom line is, you need to starve this stuff. Yeah, food supplies nutrition even up here, and you need to kill it. So when we get back from this short break, I want Erin to go back to when she was 6 years old. Something. You know, the book is just so educational. I forwarded the book, and I got to tell you, when you sent me the transcript and I began reading it, you go on highs and lows. You talk about stresses of your early life. Do you believe, I give these lectures all around now, and many times there are psychoneuroimmunologists at these lectures who educate people that your early life stresses and what happened to you when you were young carries on later in life. Do you feel that much of what you suffered from, not just sinuses, but whole body problems, had to do with the stresses you lived with Dad?
It probably didn't cause it, but I think when I was trying to heal, and I also was emotionally hurting as well, I think it's kind of like a tripod, you know, spirituality and your emotions and your health. And if one of those is not working properly, you know, you can't be at your best. So that's what I tried to do with the book. I split it into 3 parts. There's emotional health, physical health, and spiritual health. And God, to me, is a big part of that because He healed me not just physically, but emotionally as well.
Well, I think to all of us, however, not all acknowledge that. You know, I mean, it's so important to understand, folks, that there was an emotional upbringing here, and I thought you handled that eloquently. There was an emotional upbringing that may have weighed heavily on her immune system, right? And then at 6 years old, that's where I wanted to start because the book got really exciting there. At 6 years old, tell us what happened, what might have contributed to all these health problems later on.
Well, we lived in the Bronx until I was 6, and I was perfectly healthy. And then we moved about an hour upstate into a house, and we all kind of went, oh, it smells it here. You know, it smells like mold. And everybody in the home started getting allergies. I got hit the worst because, as we know, mold, you know, it's very different depending on the person. Somebody could drop dead and another person can feel nothing.
And dare I say, fair-skinned people suffer from mold problems and allergies, you know, more than others. Isn't that fascinating?
You just taught me something. I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No,
oh, you
I
got to look
didn't know
that
that.
up. Oh, that I learned 40 years ago.
Oh.
So you were fair-skinned, and here you were living in a moldy environment.
Yeah, so I came down with asthma, pretty severe asthma. I remember just getting up the stairs to my bedroom was difficult, and wheezing and allergies. But, you know, today people just think that's normal. Allergies and asthma is a normal thing, but it's not. It doesn't have to be. And so I stayed that way, and then...
Were you on
I was on an inhaler. I was on steroids.
At 6, 7 years old.
I was on antibiotics. I was always on something. And then, like I said, I moved into Manhattan 19, into probably an even moldier. Well, and I would imagine this apartment had aspergillus is probably why they found it in my sinuses, is what was in that apartment.
And you guys, aspergillus can grow into a ball. And sometimes it looks like cancer up in your sinuses, right? But aspergillomas are balls of aspergillus, and they can go up there and pull it out like they do snaring out polyps. But finally, a doctor in Florida said, wow, you got a problem. Did he say it might be contributing to all these symptoms going on, or just this?
Well, I kind of figured that also myself. The antibiotics, the over 100 courses of antibiotics, I knew the number that it did on my gut. I had leaky gut, so I was allergic to every food. And we know now if you have leaky gut, you're going to have a lot of other issues as well. So I realized I can't just keep throwing antibiotics and antifungals. I have to actually also heal my gut. So I started doing a lot of probiotics and colostrum and just building everything back up and starting over.
You believe, as I do, that fungus needs to be starved and killed.
Yes.
Thank you for all your references to my work in this great book, Eat, Pray, Get Well. And that's our website, eatpraygetwell.com. No commas, eatpraygetwell.com. I understand that you've become a very prolific writer and that you're now writing for, one of my favorite networks is God TV. A huge number of people enjoy God TV through 200 countries worldwide, and you're writing for them.
Yep.
What kind of information do you give them?
So it's kind of like my blog. I like to give a healthy Kaufman-approved recipe, and then it's always something inspirational. So it might be zucchini bread plus do you suffer from please like me disease, or a recipe and 7 ways to be miserable. So
I love it. Where are you today? 0 was where you were at 7 years old. 100 is I'm totally cured. Where are you today, and do you have to keep an eye on it?
I would say I'm at 95, and if I fall off the wagon, which of course once in a while I do, we have 3 teenagers, and I'm pretty good. When you go out to eat or you're with friends, and so I have to be careful because I can tell a difference in my body if I eat too much sugar. Or if I fall off for more than a day or 2, I see a big difference. Or I'll see my sinuses wanting to start up again, and so I go right back on.
Yeah. This is something, folks, when you have what we call a systemic mycotic infection, systemic fungal infection, we can find it here, we can find it, in the knees and so forth, but generally these people suffer from a systemic disorder. Are you suffering that way? There's a wonderful book. It's called Eat, Pray, Get Well. Eat, Pray, Get Well is Erin Porter's URL, her website. You can read all her blogs. Congratulations.
Thank
You've
you.
had to dig into this yourself, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being on.